Welcome to the Sober Christian Gentleman podcast. This is Henry. I decided to do a podcast on trusts. Now, the word trust has many connotations in the English language, but the word trusts, plural, or a trust in the legal context is a different thing altogether. And unless you're aware of it, you may not even realize what someone's talking about if they're talking about it right in front of you. So I'm going to try to explain some history of the legal trust in this podcast. It's a convoluted kind of experience because it's meant to be convoluted. The powerful use trusts to hold their property so that it can never be seized from them, even if they're found guilty of this and that and the other thing. So they can't actually suffer a loss. Everything they own is actually held at arm's length in these trusts that are there for them to enjoy. So they basically, every vehicle, every house, every property, their money, everything you can think of goes into these trusts so that it's not actually theirs anymore legally. So what it does, it creates an air gap. So if you sued one of these people personally for all the evil things they did, and you were actually able to gain a judgment against them for redress of your grievances monetarily by liquidating their property to pay you back for all the harm they caused you, there'd be zero money there. Why? Because they don't own anything on paper. Everything is legally owned by way of these trusts that are managed by third parties, but they get to benefit from the same stuff. Oh, it gets convoluted, but anyways, I'm going to try to untangle some of this history to try to give you a little bit of circumspect understanding of what we're dealing with, and then go through some basic explanations. What's important to understand is that there's two types of trust. There's the legal trust, which most people are aware of in the legal world. And then there's the lawful trust. The lawful trust is where we can actually be completely independent and not be we don't engage the legal system at all. It's completely unregistered, unregulated, uninhibited in any way, as long as you're doing no harm. What's great about a lawful trust is you can actually create a lawful trust by writing down what you want on a piece of paper. You enact it by simply putting your signature on it. It can be witnessed if you want it to be, or not even bother with that. And you basically create a structure whereby you have the donor who's giving property of value over to the trust. You have the trustee who's managing the property as a fiduciary for the trust for the benefit of the people called the beneficiaries. And it's as simple as that. There's three parts to it. And as long as you stay in the lawful side, as in harming no one, you're good to go. And you can actually transfer vehicles, transfer properties, transfer title to this and that, transfer monies. There's no limit to what you can put into these trusts. And once you put in the name of the trust, it's no longer yours, and no one can seize it from you as your asset because it's no longer your asset. So anyways, I'm going to get into some history here. It's trying to explain this stuff takes time, because it took me many years of trying to untangle this as an outsider, trying to dig into the legal world and figure these things out. And I kept thinking, maybe I'm pretty stupid or something. Like, why doesn't this make sense to me? And what I found over time was, it's not that I'm stupid. It's that they purposely make it difficult to understand what they're doing so they can get away with more without ever being found out for what they're actually doing. They're basically hiding in plain sight, but they're hiding in a deep forest that, in a metaphorical term, it's a forest of legal innuendo, where they're dealing with legal fictions and all kinds of rules, and courts that have their own rules, and different jurisdictions that have their own rules, and rules and rules and rules. And it takes you years to untangle it if you're just coming at it as an outsider trying to learn from the bottom. And what's amazing is that whenever you get into this kind of stuff, you end up bumping into these lawyers. And what's amazing is the lawyers don't even know what they're doing most of the time, because they're just doing a little small sliver. Say, imagine if the law was 360 degrees circumspect. They're only dealing with one degree of law, not all of the degrees of law. And they're only focusing on that one area because that's the area that they can basically learn the rules for and basically be functional. The rest of it is beyond them because it's too entangled for one person to know. And it ends up being one of these things where it becomes a gateway. If you have the money to pay for lawyers to sort things out, things will get sorted out in your favor generally. If you have connections and money, they're definitely going to be sorted out in your favor. And anyways, I'm going to explain some of this in the podcast. It's very convoluted. Anyways, I'm going to stop right there. Otherwise, we'll just get into it. I'm going to explain a bunch of stuff about trusts, and hopefully it'll make more sense at the end of the podcast. On with the podcast. We will begin with an opening prayer. God, give us the patience to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. God, give us discernment so we can see with clarity, followed by conviction, to act appropriately at all times and in all things. We ask that you bless us with the armor of God, cloak us with your divine protection, so that we may boldly walk in the world, to courageously be the peacemakers and make the world a better place for all your children. We ask that you move our hearts so that we know when to use the sword of the Spirit or the sword of steel to do right for ourselves, our families, and our communities. We ask that you move us in constitution to be humans who stand tall with courage, speak truth, and lead by example. We pledge on our sacred honor to rebuke evil, to speak out against evil, and to act to stop evil. We ask that you move our hearts so that we may know with absolute certainty the best way for us as individuals to act in our own way. In the power and in the name of Jesus Christ, we banish all negative entities, all evil spirits, all demons from our presence immediately. In the name of Jesus Christ, we command you, we compel you with the power of the Most High God to leave our presence for now and forever. Do not return, go now. In the name of Jesus Christ, we express with our full intention, with our freedom of choice, this area is now declared with the authority of Jesus Christ unequivocally, absolutely, totally clear of all evil entities, spirits, and energies. We say these things in Jesus' name. Amen. I thought I would do a podcast on the concept of trusts, T-R-U-S-T-S, plural or singular T-R-U-S-T. The trust is it's like a vehicle, a legal vehicle. And like all things legal, it becomes a myth within a labyrinth, within an enigma, within a whole lot of misdirection in terms that have been redefined 5 times by different applications. And when you're reading legal documents on trusts, it gets like, it helps in one way because it helps to clarify the confusion to one degree. But there's still a lot of confusion left out there because this is what empowers the powerful. See, they control the courts. They control the lawyers. They control the laws in each land that they control. So this sets up layers and layers and rings for them to actually have power from the shadows. That's why I call these people the shadow people, because it's ingenious how they work. They rule from the shadows with layers and layers and layers of agents in front of them, agents who have agents who have agents. And it's like I give the symbol many times in this podcast, it's like the Russian babushka doll. The Russian babushka doll, you crack open, babushka means grandmother, so it's a Russian grandmother doll. You open the grandmother doll, it splits in half, and you have another grandmother. You split that one in half, you have another grandmother. Split that one in half, you have another grandmother. This is a physical representation of the agency that is going on, where there's a guy representing you, and then a guy representing him, and a guy representing that guy, and it becomes a labyrinth of who's actually representing who, and to what degree, and for what purpose. Oh, and this is where it's really important to start figuring out what's going on. And I spent years doing legal research. I spent years in court trying to sort things out, and they were never sorted. I just wasted so much time getting to the point that I am now, where they have a system by which you will never succeed. It's like going to a casino. If you go to the casino, there's a lot of risk involved. You can lose your personal wealth, or you can gain some wealth, but you're a player at the table. You're not the table. This is what's amazing, is that the table has the odds in their favor, so they always win. The table always gains every time someone sits down to play a game. It doesn't matter who sits down to play the game, the table always wins. When someone gets thrown a scrap here and there. This is how the legal system works. It's a gamble by which they always win. This is the system, right? Team evil. They always win. And sometimes players who go to the table might win a little bit, but they don't win much, and they don't win consistently, and they always lose all the time. For every one time they win, they'll lose many, many times before that. And that's the point. This is a wealth vacuum. It sucks wealth into the system and doesn't give it back. That's the point of control. So the basic concept of a trust is that you have three entities. There's the donor or grantor. Let's keep the language simple, because there's a whole lot of words that mean the same concept depending on which jurisdiction you're in. Oh, it gets such a labyrinth, whether you're in common law or equity courts, and on it goes. So let's just keep it simple, right? The whole point is to stay out of court. If you can stay out of court, then you can actually have a good time. As soon as you get into court, the bad times are coming. So the way it works is there's a guy named a grantor. I'll keep with that word. And the grantor grants property to the trust. And the trust is just an imaginary thing. It's a container. That's an imaginary box. Think of it as just a glass box is sitting in front of you, and that's the trust. Now, nothing happens with the trust unless people are doing things, because the trust is inanimate. It's a legal fiction. Just like you'd have a glass box in front of you. You can open the glass box, look inside, put stuff in the glass box, take stuff out, but the glass box does nothing on its own. It's just a vessel. You can pour water in it and you want. The glass box will not have anything to say about it. You can drain the water out if you want. You can smash the box if you want. The trust does not protect itself. It doesn't do anything on its own. It's just a receiver. So the donor is the one who actually takes something and puts it into the trust. So say the donor takes a car and says, okay, I'm going to put this car in the name of the trust. So he basically puts the ownerships into the box, puts the car keys in there. And now the car keys and ownerships for the car is in the box. Now, physical car is not in the box because that's in the real world. It can't actually get in there. But the point is that by him declaring it to be so, and he can write it down on a piece of paper as simple or as complex as he wants, he can even do it orally, which are respected in many jurisdictions. But as soon as you run into any kind of challenge, the courts usually throw that stuff out because they want stuff on paper. And usually the stuff they want on paper is only when they've got a favorite party they want to win and they're looking for a quick way out. So all you got to do is write down on paper. This is where spelling comes into place. See, spelling is a roll-on term from the days of wizards. Wizards used to cast spells by writing down their intentions by way of written language on a scroll. The scroll was either held as a reminder of what their intention was, or sometimes it's burned as an offering to the gods, and the intention goes up into the air. They thought the gods would be able to get their letter that way. See, spelling is all about the knockoff roll-on terms from the days of magic and wizardry. And when you start looking at the stuff, it is really just a continuation of that practice, but with modern kind of upgrades to it. This is what's fascinating when you start studying history and law, So anyways, the donor is the one who's giving the thing. So he's giving something. It's either a vehicle, right? He'll sign over the papers so that the papers go into the trust, as in the car is legally, lawfully in the trust. And the car keys are given over, so it's no longer in his direct control. Now there's two other entities in this thing. There's three people in every trust. Just like there's the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. In this Trinity, we get back to the trust Trinity, you have these three entities. There's the donor, the trustee, and the beneficiary. So the trustee is the person who is holding the assets that are within the trust for the benefit of the beneficiary. Seems pretty straightforward. So the guy who is set up as the trustee is not holding that property for his own interest. It's not for his use and enjoyment. It's for the beneficiary's use and enjoyment. So the beneficiaries are the ones that are going to benefit from the property that's within the trust. So in this case of a car, the trustee could hold the car until the beneficiaries are either old enough to not be hassled traveling around in their vehicle. Then they're handed the car in good working order with the car keys and sold. Okay, you don't actually own this car because the car is owned by the trust, but you can use it whenever you want. Here's the keys on the wall. Just take it, go have at it. That's the simplest form of trust you can think of, is that the donor donates the car to the trust. The trustee is managing the car to make sure it's well kept and secured so that the beneficiaries can benefit from that car at some future date, even if it's right now. Now, another simple example of this would be the donor donates a house with some property. So the donor donates house and property into the trust. So he legally just writes it over as, signs it over into the name of the trust, hands over the keys of the house. The trustee now takes hold of this thing and he's holding on to it for the benefit of the beneficiaries. So he's not going to be using the house. He's going to be making sure it's available to the beneficiaries. And depending on how the contract was drawn up, he might have to, with a cash pile, make sure the house is maintained, the taxes are paid so they don't lose the house. The property's managed so it doesn't go wild and foul. There's some duties that are going on with this contract to make sure the house is given to the beneficiaries at some future date so it actually benefits them. And then the third thing would be like a boat. Say there's a boat. The donor gives a boat to the trust. The trustee takes the boat, puts it into their name with the contract for giving the benefit to the beneficiaries at some future date. And then whenever the beneficiaries want to use the boat, they come see the trustee. The trustee hands them the keys, delivers the boat to wherever they want, and they get to drive around the boat in the water doing their thing according to the trustee contract. And then it gets kind of complicated when you start getting further on into the examples, because there's all kinds of more complicated ones where people know the concept of a trustee kid. People know this term is like, oh, that's a trustee kid. What's a trustee kid? Well, a trustee kid is someone who's a beneficiary of a trust. And what happened was that some day, way in, usually back, there was someone who had money, and they had money and they want to make sure that whatever, and the point where their child was going to graduate, say, high school and start university, they want to make sure there's enough money there so that their child could have a good university education and everything would be paid for. So say they put in $1 million into a bank account into the trust. So imagine, again, you have this glass box. The donor puts $1 million in a glass box. The trustee has to hold on to that $1 million until the beneficiaries are ready to receive it. Now, sometimes there'll be like a investment structure where there'll be an agreement that, okay, the donor will give $1 million to the trustee, and the trustee over the course of, say, 15 years will turn that $1 million into $5 million using different investment methods. And how it usually works with investments is that the safer the investment, the lower the return. So if you're taking very low risk, there's low return on it, and maybe 2% investment per year on a low risk investment could be actually gaining interest over time, and will turn that $1 million into something more if you do the math, depending on how the investment structure goes. So low risk, low return, but over time it pays out. So the donor wants his $1 million to turn into a little bit more. Now you have another option where you could be doing a more high risk investment, where you take half the money and you put it into these low risk investment funds where you're only getting 2-3% per year. But the other half is in volatile, high risk, high reward investment strategies. So for 15 years, this money could be churning, winning and losing, depending on how the money is invested. At the other 15 years, at the very end, there might be, $15 million between the two strategies to increase the money in the trust fund. So the point is that over a period of time, this trust fund is actually building up money, and it'll be written out in a contract, because a trust is essentially contract law, verbal or written. And what ends up happening is the kid who now comes of age, whether he's 16, 18, or whatever's decided by in the trust, now has access to those funds, but he does not have access to all of it. He might have access to, say he's given $10,000, just as a number that's easy to kind of go off of. So the first year, say he turns 16, $10,000 is deposited in his bank account. And the year when he turns 17, $20,000 is put into his bank account. When he turns 18, $30,000 is put in his bank account. And every year his birthday comes around, he has $10,000 extra in his bank account. So he didn't do anything during this money. What he's doing is he's the beneficiary of this trust. And whoever set the trust up wanted him to enjoy the benefit of wealth at some point. And the numbers I'm giving you don't sound like wealthy numbers, but I mean, would you turn down $10,000 a year on your birthday, every year gaining $10,000? No, it actually benefits you in some way. Even if you're a raging drug addict, it would help something. So these are how trust fund kids get their money. It's that at some point in the past, a trust fund was created whereby they were going to get money at incremental amounts over the course of their lifetime until the trust exhausted itself. And there's always a risk there where if someone wants no risk, then they just have $1 million sitting, gaining interest in a bank somewhere, and then it gets dispersed over a period of time. If they want to go with a little bit of risk and get more money for their trust fund kid, then they do a little bit of investment with that money. It gets very complicated as you start figuring out how much risk you want to take, how much reward you want to gain, on and on it goes. These things can be very interesting. So this is what a trust fund kid is. A trust fund kid is a beneficiary of a trust. He did not invest in the trust. He is the beneficiary. He gets the benefit of the investment. Now the trustee does not get the benefit of this investment because his job as the trustee is to increase the wealth in the trust, or just manage the wealth so that it's not lost, or to do this and that. It just depends on what the trust structure is. Now, there's other examples. So that's the trust fund kid. People are seeing it all the time in the news, like, oh, trust fund kid arrested again for being a BLM activist or whatever. This is where some of these kids come out. They come through life and they don't have to do anything. They're just going to earn money forever. And they don't see any point in doing anything. And this is some of the communist fodder that gets tied up in these Antifa groups, the BLM groups, these communist groups, because these guys come from wealth. They have no idea what wealth is. They have no idea about earning money, earning your own keep. They have no idea about poverty because they'll never experience poverty because they are a trust fund kid that are protected financially through their lives. This is what's so dangerous about these individuals who get caught up in Antifa and all this, animal rights activism and stuff, because they're in a no-lose situation. No matter what they do, they're going to win. So they take risks other people don't, and they do things other people wouldn't do. And then anyways, so this is how the trust works. You have three parts: the grantor, the trustee, and the beneficiary. Now, it can get kind of complicated because you can actually have trust structures where the grantor can also be a beneficiary. So he can actually put himself in line to get the benefit of the thing given. So as an example, there could be a property. So say it's 100 acres, and this property owner wants to make sure that this property stays within his realm of influence. He actually wants to be on the property, and he wants to start a little commune or something. And what he does is he basically hands this property over into a trust, and then there's a trustee who's managing the property to make sure the property has its taxes paid from a nest egg of money that is put in advance to pay off those bills and stuff. And the property owner can actually go onto the land and basically build a little cabin in the corner and start living his life. And then he could attract other people to be part of this commune. They all build little properties, create a little community. And the property is actually not actually owned by him anymore. It's actually owned by the trust. And the point of the trust is to benefit people who are part of the commune. And anyone who's part of the commune is getting the benefit of this property in the trust. The trustee's job is to make sure the property doesn't get lost. So that means the taxes need to be paid to whoever's demanding taxes, so it's not lost for some stupid reason. And on top of that, the property is being managed, right, so that it doesn't get lost. And basically the donor, who became also a beneficiary, can actually utilize the property however they see fit, as long as it's within the realms of the trust. Depending if it's a revocable trust or irrevocable trust, the trustee may have to hand back the property at some point to the grantor if there's some clause in there that triggers a reversal so that it goes back to the grantor. But usually these things are meant to hold on to something in a specific line for a long time. So that's another example of a trust where right now, as another kind of point, there's a bunch of different non-governmental organizations that are setting up legal trusts to hold on to property so people cannot develop it. These are called land trusts. What will end up happening is some NGO, non-governmental organization, will do fundraisers and will raise millions of dollars. And what they're doing is they're raising these millions of dollars as a pool of money to purchase private property. Now, they're not really purchasing the property, but they're purchasing the title to the property. And what ends up happening is they'll gobble up a whole chunk of land in an area and have they'll end up with 1,000 acres. And this 1,000 acres will be put into a land trust. So the people who are running the land trust never came up with the money on their own. They did fundraising and had generally environmentally conscious people in the public donate money. And then a couple really bigwig, purses threw in there. They got a bunch of money for a land trust. And then what happens? Well, the land trust just holds onto that land and makes sure that no one builds on it. They will never sell the land privately. They will never allow development on the land. And now the land is just sitting there going fallow. So even if it was farmland, it's now going fallow and going back to nature. And they'll call this a nature trust or land trust or nature reserve. There's all kinds of different names they have for it. And this is where I'm actually watching private property being gobbled up by these trusts that are metastasizing. Like one trust will join another trust, which will join another trust, and they'll end up having this huge swath of land where no one can buy the property to develop it, even if it's really great land for growing crops. This is one of the strategies that Team Evil is using to right in plain sight rewild the wilderness. They're doing it right in front of you all around. I'm looking at maps, and you look at the succession of maps like from 20 years ago, 10 years ago, today. These parks and land trusts and wilderness preserves and wilderness reserves, these things are just expanding. And there's less and less land that people can actually purchase. where it gets into the thing of like, you don't actually own the land. All right, so we'll get into the history of trust because it's kind of important now that I've laid that foundation. So back not too long ago, say 1,000 years ago, just to make it simple, there was kings and queens that owned everything. It was a feudal system. The feudal system was they were constantly feuding. They were constantly fighting over land and property and things of that nature. Now with the feudal system, the king made claim to everything. And this is what people have a hard time wrapping their mind around. When the king of France claimed he owned France, he claimed he owned every blade of grass, every fleck of dust, every person, every man, woman, and child, every cattle, every deer, everything was owned by the king. This is like a pretty big claim, but how he enforced his claim with brute force. He enforced his claim by forcing you to acknowledge his claim. See, if you didn't acknowledge his claim, he'd kill you. It's pretty simple, isn't it? If you tried to say, no, I'm a free man and I have God granted inalienable rights, I abide by the laws of nature, he would just send down 20 goons and they'd rip you to pieces for a public display, maybe hang parts of you around town, an arm here, an arm there, a leg here, leg there, head over here, just to show you who's boss, right? This is what they did, famously, many, many times. So this feudal system, and as I've talked about in my podcast and several other episodes, is just a control structure. The feudal system is a control structure. It's a network that provides for the shadow people who are really in control to always remain in the shadows. And in front of them are layers and layers of agents. And these agents are the ones who actually control things through the king system. And one of the symbols of the shadow people was the thing called the crown. C-R-O-W-N, crown. Now the crown was a symbol of power. What you have to appreciate is that every king that was part of this network had a crown on their head. It didn't matter if they were the king of England, the king of France, the king of Timbuktu. They had a crown on their head. Why? Because the crown sat higher than the king. And the king sat higher than everyone else on the land, which he claimed to own outright. This is before even slavery was a concept in, Europe generally. It gets kind of confusing because the word slave comes from the word Slav. So the Slavish peoples, there was a whole group there that was into slave trading and stuff. But that's where the concept of slaving comes from the Slavic peoples. There's a group there that were super dark. And trying to explain that one is just going too far off of this particular topic. The Khazarians basically took over the Tartarian Empire and left us with this awful world we have. Anyways, so this group that was in the Slavic region, that was basically known as Ukraine today, was the headquarters of this group of people that were running things. And out in front of them, they had all these layers and layers and layers of kings and queens and monarchy and all this stuff. And it was very simple back in the day, 1,000 years ago. It was basically, you do what you're told or we kill you. It's real simple. You do what you're told or you die. And they kept it real simple for a long time. So what ended up happening, and this is where the history of trusts come from. Because what would happen is the king of a land would claim to own everything. So if everything was owned by the king, he's only one man. How does he actually manage things? How does he actually raise armies? How does he feed? How does he make sure people are fed so they don't starve to death? That kind of thing. Now, if you just left people alone, they wouldn't starve to death because they would just find their own means. They would be farmers and fishers and hunters. They would do their thing and provide for themselves. But the whole excuse of the feudal system was, I've got to feed the people. It's like, yeah, the people are eating just fine before you came along and killed them all to tell them who's boss. So anyways, it goes along with this whole thing of like, okay, the king owned everything. So how does he actually dole responsibility out? How does he delegate, right? And how he delegated was by giving lands and titles. This is where you have like all these different stupid titles in England and France, where you basically, it's like the Duchess of whatever, and it would be like some title that was for a particular chunk of land. So the Duke or Duchess of some area would be in control of like, say, 1 million acres. And then this Duke or Duchess of this 1 million acres had responsibilities to the king. Like the only way he would get this title is to be favorable with the king, as in to kiss the king's butt, or to be very useful to the point where he was needed. And then what would happen is the king would grant these titles, and say the Duke of whatever. So I'll just say Timbuktu, just because it's kind of funny. There is a place in Africa called Timbuktu, and it was basically a common term in English, in Britain English, from here to Timbuktu. Anyways, so say he's the Duke of Timbuktu. So now the Duke of Timbuktu has an obligation to basically raise soldiers. So he's going to have to raise 1,000 soldiers that are going to be totally armored up, so that they can fight in the king's army. So that's part of the bargain. So the king will say, I'm going to grant you all these lands, 1 million acres. But in return for that 1 million acres, I need you to provide, say, 1,000 tons of wheat, 1,000 tons of this and that. And I want you to provide 1,000 soldiers that are fully armored up, ready to fight in war with their horses and everything. So now the Duke has a task where, to keep his lands and to not be killed by the king, he has to go around and start subdividing the land up into different areas to be productive. So he'll start actually dividing the land into little fiefdoms, where he'll grant titles, because now he has the title over this area. He'll subtitle these different areas, where if there's a big area to grow wheat, he'll give that off to some guy with a special title. And it'll just be divided up, right? And then he'll basically pick an area that's going to be like the combat training zone. This is where all the right blood are going to be coming to be trained to be knights. And they're going to be, so like basically it's an organization structure, right? Let's say a kingdom has like 100 million acre chunks, and there's like 100 dukes that are dividing it up. At the end of the day, there's going to be a giant army that's going to be coming after a few years to be able to fight for the king to gain more lands. And in all this, the king doesn't actually risk anything, because he just laid claim. Anyone challenges his claim gets killed. So he didn't actually personally do anything to earn this land, but he's basically the local gangster. So this is how the concept of trust came along. So the land was entrusted to the Duke from the king, who owned everything. And what's amazing is that the Duke was not actually given the land. He was given a piece of paper that said he had the right to the land. He was given title to the land. See, the lands and titles. And so the way some of these Duke and Duchess kind of systems work is it could be hereditary, as in it'll go down to the children of the children of the children, or it could be only for the life of that guy. And then once he's dead, it reverts back to the king's decision to decide who to grant this Duke title to someone else. And it gets very convoluted, because these things, as they go on in time, they get more and more complex, and people are trying to leverage each other out for small gains. And this is how it generally works. So it was all granting title. It was granting the rights to things without underlying property. Like the physical property was not given to the Duke. He only has the right to use that property as a sub, almost like a tenant of the king. Many people are familiar with landlord and tenant. Back England in feudal times, the landlord was the lord of the land. He was the sub guy who was in charge of a particular small area. He was the lord of that land, lord this and that and the other thing. And even today, if you want to get the title of lord to your name in England, you have to own like something like 1,000 acres to be able to qualify to be given the title of lord. And if you have 1,000 acres and you give like $10 million to the crown, they'll very officially, with all kinds of pomp and ceremony, grant you the title of lord. So lord this and lord that, right? That's where the title comes from, as a landlord. In more common terms that people recognize is a landlord. Usually, if you're a tenant, you have to pay the landlord so you have the right to use the property. If you don't pay the rent, then the landlord has the right to kick you out, and it gets all kind of crazy there. But this is how it works. This is a simple concept many people are familiar with. So this is how it works. And with the trust structure, this is the same type of thing. The different kind of titles and noble hereditary kind of benefits were handed down generation to generation, and this was in a trust structure. And this is where the first trusts were actually created, because they basically took the trust structure where you have the donor the trustee, and then the beneficiaries. What would happen is the father would, when he was getting near the time to hand the reins off to his firstborn son, or whichever son survived, he would reshuffle the trust. So it would be he would take all the lands in the estate, it was known as the estate, of this particular family. So let's just say Lord Black. So Lord Black wants to give his sons and family in perpetuity all the estate that he has. This estate has multiple different obligations and duties and titles and blah, blah, blah. It could be this and that, Duke of this and Duke of that and Duke of the other thing. And who knows what survived since back in the day. He might have upset the king and lost a couple titles and helped the king and gained a couple titles. It's just like a holding structure, right? So anyways, the estate is known as everything that is basically on paper, that are the rights and duties and land, but the titles that they have exclusive use over for their particular family holdings. So the estate gets shuffled when it's time to hand it down to the next level. So what'll happen is the father, who is the beneficiary of his estate, because his father kind of handed it down to him, put him as the first beneficiary, which gives him a special power to actually transition this is the way it would usually work, is they transition the trust into the next generation. So because he's the first trustee with the special right to it's almost like winding down a corporation, where they're shutting down one corporation and then transferring all the assets over to another. So they wind down the first trust and then transfer all the assets over to the second trust, which has the same name. So it's basically the family estate is being evaporated in one instance, and then as the donor, the guy who actually has the right to do this will donate everything in the estate to the new family trust. So he becomes the donor in this instance, and all the estate goes into the trust that is being run by a trustee, which is often not the actual family themselves, but they'll have a team of lawyers or confidants that actually run it for them. And then the beneficiaries is actually the family. So the person who has the legal right to do this will make sure that the first trust is decommissioned and the next trust is commissioned, and now they have a new estate. It's the same as the old estate, except it's everything intact with the new people in charge. So now if the father dies, then everything just stays in the trust. The whole family keeps going. And until there's a new kind of elderly member of the family, they're not going to bother winding down the old trust and winding up a new trust. This is how it works. And this is intergenerational wealth is transferred this way, where all the lands and titles and estates and cash, holdings, and it gets complicated over time. But this is how it went from father to eldest son, to then their eldest son, to their eldest son. This is how intergenerational wealth was built, through the trust structure, just called estate transfer and things like that. They used many different words to describe the same thing. Why? Because no one ever challenges them on it. Even when you're reading books on law, it gets very convoluted, because even the law books have multiple different kind of synonyms, or it could mean this, it could mean that, and they don't spend much time defining these things because it's in their interest. They benefit from not having all these really hard definitions, because they can be very vague when they're writing their contracts. Why? Because it benefits them to hide in plain sight by being just confusing to the average person. And this is the point, is that the the shadow people are in the shadows, and Team Evil is their agents in front of them, and Team Evil is shuffling the deck all the time, trying to make things confusing. So you're not sure exactly what's going on. And even today, I get in arguments all the time with people over what is the crown. Because when you look at, say, a country like Canada, it's a fake country. It's not really a country. People pretend it's a country when it's not. The originating document was called the BNA, the British North America Act. Now, the BNA was actually signed and voted on in England. Now, how is it that a country, which is supposed to be sovereign, would have a different group vote for it to be put into existence? That's not possible. Either you're a sovereign country or you're not. And in the case of Canada, what's known as Canada today, they're not a sovereign country. It's just a placeholder. It was a wealth management strategy to hold on to all these claims that were put forward by the Crown. And even when you read the original BNA, there's all this language like the Queen and right, the Crown and right of Canada and the Queen and this and that. And there's like this whole paragraph of these titles that are vague and uncertain that are basically claiming the land, but holding it in trust for the people. In the language, it sounds like it's a land management trust, but it's not, because the whole power structure of Canada is that the Governor General is the guy in charge of all of Canada. And who is he in charge of Canada for? It's this vague thing called the Crown and Right of Canada, and and then there's different titles of nobility. It kind of sounds like it's the Queen of England, but it's not quite sure. And maybe the King or Queen of England, or who knows who really it is. It could be the Crown, which is known as the City of London is known as the Crown. It's like the crown jewel. It is the power center for 1,000 years. The City of London, not London City, but the City of London is like a 10 square mile. That's its own separate zone. It's not even part of England. It's its own jurisdiction. It has its own mayor, its own police force. You can have passports from the City of London. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? So the City of London is its own entity. Without getting into that, the point is that the thing called Canada, people think is actually a country. It's not. It's just a holding facility for the resources of Canada. And if you try to mine in Canada, who has the rights? The Crown. You have to pay for a permit, for permission to mine the rights for the actual minerals underneath the soil. And if you want to do almost anything, you need a permit from who? The Crown. If you want to get land anywhere, often you have to buy land from the Crown. Who's the Crown? Well, I don't know. It's just the Crown, you know. It gets vague and uncertain, and it's like, it's a Crown Corporation. What's a Crown Corporation? I don't know. Can't figure it out. No one wants to tell me, and they don't want to tell me, say for sure. It's just ridiculous. So basically, the entirety of the land called Canada is owned by the Crown. And there's certain areas that have been subdivided into municipalities and cities and all these different territories and provinces and stuff. And there's this very complex land title thing going on, or if you think you're buying 10 acres in a particular area in Canada, you're not actually buying the 10 acres, you're buying the title to the 10 acres. So that gives you the right to use the property to a certain degree. But the actual owner of that property is the Crown. The Crown owns the property. You're just a tenant on the property, and that's why you have to pay property tax. The tax is going to the Crown for the pleasure of using their land. And most people just don't know this. They're just not educated enough to be aware of it. And I can understand why you don't want to care about this stuff, because it's a giant scam. It's a scheme to vacuum up wealth from one group of people and give it to another. And they maintain control through this whole structure. And that's the point of the vagueness and uncertainty. They want to keep it vague and uncertain so you never know what's going on. And anyone who tries to actually start enforcing contracts or contract law or start doing trust things in court, oh man, it gets confusing, because you never know which jurisdiction the judge is sitting in. Are they sitting in common law jurisdiction? Are they sitting in equity jurisdiction? They have no obligation to tell you. They can switch in mid-sentence and with no obligation to tell you. The whole thing is so ridiculous. And if you're an outsider, you're going to get treated badly. But if you're an insider, as in a friend of the powerful, you can be treated very well and just magically win all your cases, even with stupid arguments and barely showing up. I mean, it's how it works. So the trust structure is this old system by which the powerful maintained power and can always withdraw that power from you. This is where the rights idea, land rights, rights get into a very convoluted thing, because if you're given rights by someone else, then those rights can be withdrawn by that person who gave them to you, because obviously they have more power than you. How could they have given you something without having it to give? And this is where the law gets very convoluted, because without proving that they have the right to give this thing, they grant rights to people. And then whenever someone disobeys or gets upset or does something to upset the power structure, those rights can be withdrawn at any time. People find themselves in a jail cell for years, and they can't understand it, because they thought they had this thing called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And what's weird about it is if you ever follow the case on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, anyone who's actually challenging the powerful never win those cases. But anyone who's moving along the agenda of the powerful win those cases. If it's in the interest of climate change and total power for the government bodies, then they will win by way of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. If it's pushing the LGBTQ false rainbow agenda, the suicide of the West agenda, they will win those cases in court. Why? Because it's pushing the agenda of the powerful. And that's where those rights are there, to make sure that things look like they're going a certain way. But if you ever try to use the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the place called Canada to try to assert your rights to not be pushed around by government agents, to not be forced to do stuff, to not be having mandates against you, you will lose all those cases. Why? Because the Charter's not real. As in, it's only there to misdirect you, to waste your time, to make you think something's going on when it's not. And when it's convenient for them, they will just withdraw the Charter. They'll pull it back. They'll disappear on you. And what's amazing is in the original British North American Act, there was a thing called the, what's the name of it? It's like the Charter, I think they call it there. Oh, the Bill of Rights is what it was called. So the Bill of Rights in the original British North American Act was way more comprehensive and made more sense, even though you could tell it wasn't it could be twisted whatever way the powerful wanted to go. But the original Bill of Rights that was in the Constitution of Canada, known as the British North American Act, actually had more rights for individuals granted by the Crown. And then later on, when this guy named Trudeau Sr., not the current Prime Minister, but his father, made this big deal about creating the Charter and Freedoms. And people were like thinking, well, don't we already have a Bill of Rights? What's the point of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? And it became very confusing. And what they did is they basically made this big show of having all these discussions and arguments between provinces, and on it went. And it was a big show thing. And finally, they come out exhausted with their ties wrapped around their heads. They're like, we got it. We finally figured out how to do this thing. And we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Just 3 cheers. And people were trying to figure out, like, what happened? What's the point? And the point was to misdirect people. So right around the same time, the place called Canada was turning socialist. And the only way to get through these socialist programs was to make it appear like the Bill of Rights disappeared and the new Charter of Rights was there to protect you. This is where they brought in a bunch of landlord tenancy act laws that gave more rights to the tenants than the alleged landlords, to basically protect the servant class, so people would be liking the idea of communism. These are all like many steps in the path towards endearing people to the idea of communism, to get people thinking, oh, communism is cool. Socialism is like, all right, but communism is even better. And it goes on and on with this really crazy sequence of events whereby people were swindled into thinking the Charter of Rights was better than the Bill of Rights, and then the Bill of Rights was just basically forgotten, and the courts all pursue this Charter of Rights things. And what's amazing is one of the guys who actually signed off on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was the old Premier of Newfoundland. And only in the last couple of years, when COVID happened, where he tried to actually use the Charter the way he thought it was intended to be used, then he got shot down in court, and he just couldn't believe it, because he was one of the founding kind of creators of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. He's one of the last living people who was actually in on the meetings, and his signature was on these documents. And yet he was not able to actually reverse the draconian COVID lockdown measures and vaccine mandates. He was just astounded. And you actually hear him doing interviews just thinking, like, what's the point? What did we spend all this time on? I mean, how did this happen? Like, how could we have been tricked? And he's suffering from like a syndrome where if he's real, he just can't believe he's been tricked for so long. And he only saw it now after being used as a tool in the system. And anyways, it becomes very interesting how seeing these characters, who are part of the system, and they had no idea that they're being used as tools. Their names are being used. Their actions, their time and energy is being used to further the beast system. So anyways, yeah, he's lost all his cases trying to reverse these vaccine mandates, reverse the lockdown stuff, trying to get compensation for people who've been injured. The whole thing is outstanding. Watching him, who was one of the original authors of this, Charter of Rights and Freedoms, just have it not work the way he thought it was supposed to work. And this is what happened. They basically create this document that is a red herring that gets you going in one direction. But secretly, this document was never actually legally put into place. So when you actually follow the history of it, they never actually had the legal quorum they needed. They never had the votes they needed. They never had the signatures they needed. It was just a giant smoke and mirror show. It was like a carnival ride. You go in, you come out, and it moves on. And only later on did people find this out, and they're seeing it happen. But anyways, the point is that if you're relying on the state to give you rights, the problem is they can withdraw those rights whenever they want. Whenever the powerful no longer want to give you those rights, they'll just mandate you take a suicide shot. Why? Because they can. And this is where it's so important to differentiate between legal and lawful. See, the difference between a legal trust and a lawful trust is that a lawful trust works under the principles of natural law, which means harm no one. As long as you're harming no one, then you can have a contract between as many people as you want that expresses your intention. And you're bound by contract law according to natural law. It basically means honoring your word. So to have a lawful trust, you just have to write down on a piece of paper what your intention is to do with a particular thing. Say your intention is to actually run a business under the lawful trust method, but then you basically take the person with the assets, which would become the donor or the grantor. Keep it simple, donor. And the donor will donate the assets that are going to be put into the name of the trust so that the trust can do business. The important thing is to write the document down so it's very clear what the point is. What are the guardrails of this operation? And once you write down your intent expressly by being very clear about what you're planning on doing, what the assets are going to be used for and whatever, then the grantor signs over the property into the name of the trustee as a trustee. Now, what's interesting about doing the lawful method is that the trustee will put everything in his legal name so that he can interact with the fiction known as the legal system. So the trustee will have everything in his name, whether it's a vehicle or property, as in a house or a building or whatever, whether there's a lease or whatever agreements, the trustee is going to sign all those documents as the trustee for the trust. And then the beneficiaries are going to be whoever's going to benefit from this particular business venture. So there could be investors that are actually investing in this thing, and they're going to be the beneficiaries of this this trust. So you could have 10 guys who are actually the beneficiaries of the trust, including the original donor who actually gave the vehicle, the property, and whatever legal rights and to the whatever the endeavor is going on. So the donor actually gets to benefit from as a beneficiary, but all the other investors in the business get to benefit as well as a beneficiary of this particular business. You can even have a share structure where you actually sell shares to particular investors that are just receiving dividends. It gets all kinds of interesting, however you want to do it. But the thing about staying lawful is that by staying in the lawful side of the trust is that you do everything without engaging the legal system. The trustee does everything in his own name, his own legal fiction name as the trustee, though not as his personal capacity. And by differentiating the two, he's able to interact with the land of the dead, the mortgage people, and the corporate fiction people. Corporate means a body. It's a corporate, like a corporal, this and that. It means like just a vessel, a body. It's an unliving thing. So there's a way to interact with the living, which is the living group, interacts with the dead, which is the legal group. As long as one does not apply for any tax, this and that, do not request a tax number, because as soon as you request a tax number, you've just brought yourself into the land of the dead, and now you're liable for all kinds of craziness that'll happen. And the problem is, okay, so just to keep it simple, by doing a lawful trust, even running a business or putting your private assets in, your personal assets in, it's a way to do this without engaging the legal system at all, except for the trustee doing it in a way that's benefiting the beneficiaries. It's a very simple, sleek way to do it without any complication. Now, the other way to do it is a legal trust. This is where lawyers chomp at the bit to start legal trust, because a legal trust by law is a legal corporation. And it basically becomes a corporate structure whereby you cannot actually engage with the system unless you have lawyers representing your interests, because there can be no one living to present the interest of the trust. If it's a legal trust, you have to actually hire lawyers then. So if you actually do a legal trust, which is what they always want you to get, the lawyers always want you to do, the government always wants you to do, everyone who doesn't know what's going on or is part of the system wants you to have a legal trust. Why? Because their friends who are lawyers benefit. And then their friends who are in government benefit, because now you end up becoming a tax-paying entity, and they'll go after you for that kind of stuff. Even though taxes are voluntary, they'll just pretend it's not. They'll just say you have to owe this and that. And they'll say, oh, if you just pay these taxes, you get a benefit by paying less taxes than you were personally. And instead of taking 50% of your taxes, we're going to take 25% of your taxes. We'll give you a break because you're a trust structure. And it goes on and on, right? So this is the thing, is that you can't actually have a bank account in the name of a lawful trust, but you can have a bank account in the name of a legal trust. A legal trust gives you all these entitlements, but with those entitlements come obligations, and those obligations are paying taxes and all kinds of stuff. So it becomes like a quagmire. If you down the legal trust route, it's a maze of lost cost, where you have to hire lawyers. The lawyers have to argue about stuff, and nothing's ever straightforward. And then they got to send letters back and forth, and the whole thing just evaporates the resources of the trust over time. Whereas with a lawful trust, you don't have the convenience of having a bank account in the name of your trust, but your trustee can have a bank account in his name on behalf of the trust. And you're still writing checks and still holding money in bank accounts. You can still do everything you do like lawfully. You can do everything you do legally, except you don't have the obligations of engaging lawyers to present you and paying taxes and stuff like that. Lawfully, there's no taxes to pay, because you're just men having an interaction whereby you're exchanging value for value, and you cannot tax value for value exchanges. If I give a guy 5 gold pieces, which is an actual tangible good, for 20 loaves of bread, there's no taxation on that, because we're just exchanging value. There's value for value transfer. The whole taxation scheme starts coming in when you get into the legal fiction of actual using fiat currency, and then registering yourself as an agent for the government, collecting taxes. The whole thing gets gets into a labyrinth of fraud within fraud within fraud. And just don't do it. Just stay away from that. I stay away from that. I've made mistakes in the past thinking I was understanding stuff, and I just misunderstood, because I understood only to a certain degree, but then there's a new fraud beyond the fraud I was realizing. This is the problem with engaging in the legal system, is it's a fraud within fraud within fraud, and you'll never get out of it. You'll never get an advantage, because the people who are getting the advantage are the shadow people, and their minions, who are Team Evil, are constantly stripping away your wealth. They're like a giant parasite that just remove wealth and redistribute it to their friends. See, they're operating at a level beyond money. Money is just for the little people. Money is to control people. They're living in a realm that's beyond money. It's where it's power and control and wealth and privilege, and they're able to manipulate things this way and that. They're able to snap their fingers and whole villages will disappear off the map. That's where the power lies, and that's where they play at. So this lawful trust is an opportunity to just get out of the system. And I'll expand on that a little bit, because just to differentiate this and that, because it's a concept that most people are having a hard time wrapping their minds around. And the point is that it's designed to make it difficult to understand. When you actually start reading through these books on legal trusts, even the lawyers writing the treatise on legal trusts can't actually pin stuff down. They're saying this word, this word, this word, this word, this word, this word. These 7 words all mean kind of the same thing, and no one's ever defined it for some weird reason. And they're just all going with whatever they think works in the situation, and don't worry about it, right? These are supposedly the well-researched ones, not just the Johnny ambulance chasers. Just fascinating stuff when you start digging through and peeling back the layers and realizing what's going on. And this is the thing, is that we're dealing with a giant system that is a fraudulent system. The king has no right to own the lands and everyone in the lands, but he does it by force. He enforces his claims. And this is where all the language starts trickling down, where people enforce their claims. How do they enforce their claims? They use force. But in the modern day, they're like, oh, no, you don't use real force. No, you have to use the legal force. You have to ask a judge to make a judgment in your favor and force the other guy to do the thing you want him to do. But you can't use force. No, that'd be illegal. But we can have these other guys called the sheriffs. Yeah, they're cool. They're actually legally entitled to go beat people up and take their stuff. And it's all cool because it's legal. And this is where they've actually monopolized violence, where they say no one's allowed to use violence unless you're an army working for the nation state or a king. And then they say, well, within the realm of the king, you're not allowed to do violence unless you're authorized by the king, which means the sheriffs and the police. It's like their guys get to do violence. They have a monopoly on violence, and we're not allowed to use violence, even self-defense. Depending on where you are, you can find yourself in a hefty jail time, even just defending your own life. If they decide to target you for whatever reason or make it use a terror campaign against the public. Is the problem with not grabbing what's real and holding on to it with all your might. Because this is the differentiation between the fantasy of the legal system, which is all fiction. It's all corporations. These are not real. Corporation can do nothing without real living, breathing men and women working on behalf of the corporation for some interest, some endeavor, if it's a job for them or whatever. Only real people can actually interact in the real world. But there's this whole layer of legal fiction over top of us that is restricting our behavior based on this legal fiction that you don't get to. They don't allow you to withdraw your consent from it. Anyone who tries to withdraw their consent from this completely fraudulent system that uses violence to keep, you'll find very quickly that they'll put you down on a terrorist watch list. Why? Because you're terrorizing the government structure, and they don't like anyone pushing back against them, and they'll just label you as a terrorist. Some bureaucrats might be terrorized by the thought of them not being in control of you, but for the most part, it's disingenuous. It's a lie. It's just used as a control structure, because as soon as they label you as a terrorist, then you go down on these special watch lists. They can just pick you up at any day and just disappear you, claiming you're a terrorist. And the laws already exist in the book to do that. No one voted for it, but it's there anyway. That's how it works. You have these representatives that are supposed to be representing you, but they don't. They swear an oath to the crown, not to you. This is how it works. So as I'm reading through in this book on the law of trusts and estates, because they kind of roll them in together, and this one book on legal trust is actually important in that it actually gives you the history of how things got here. And they basically go down the line of like, okay, well, back in the day, there was the king's courts. The king did whatever he wanted. And then eventually, the noblemen demanded that there was a law that was universal for everybody, essentially the noblemen, but no one else. Then they started this thing called common law. And there's all these different iterations where there's the king's courts and these different common law courts and then courts of equity. And there was like a split going on where the courts of equity was basically the jurisdiction for the king to do whatever he felt like. And that was held back from the common law courts and maintained by the king. So there's these two competing courts which bifurcated again and again. And it went into these like different shell games of where the jurisdiction lies, right? Is the jurisdiction here? Is the jurisdiction there? Who knows, right? And it became very convoluted. And even these scholars who are trying to sort it out and go back in time are having a difficult time trying to figure this thing out. It's just a fascinating trot through history, because they're looking at different law books themselves. They're looking at all these history books. They're looking at case law, which is hinting at stuff. And they're trying to compile it into this like authoritative book. And even these guys who spent years and years researching the concept don't have all the answers. And they admit in this book that there's some things that are just not written, some things that are convoluted, and that they might have 3 or 4 words to describe a similar thing. And then there's other differentiations that are meaningless in law, where they're just like a style used by people of the day to differentiate between this and that, but they have no legal actual definition or meaning. And it gets interesting as I'm reading, because I'm picking up the frustration of these lawyers who are trying to be definitive and make an authoritative tome on this particular topic of trusts, and they're not able to actually get any straight answers. So it's not just outsiders trying to research this that are coming up short. even the people who are the full-on lawyers who are researching this stuff are coming up short. And why? Because they don't seem to understand is that we're dealing with a game here. And the game is something that's pretty straightforward. We're talking about, until you understand the concept that there's the shadow people who maintain the power from the shadows, and in front of them they have Team Evil that does their bidding with layers and layers and layers of agents, things don't make sense. Once you understand that context and that frame of mind, frame of reference, things start making sense. And I'm looking at this book written by lawyers who have not pierced the veil yet, who still believe the nonsense they're spouting, and they can't make heads or tails of certain things that are contradictory. And you'll never sort out the labyrinth if you don't get to the base truth. And the basic truths are very straightforward. We're dealing with one giant fraud, where a certain group of people want to maintain absolute power, and they maintain that power by keeping other people confused, going in circles, not certain about anything. See, whenever you're uncertain of things, it's hard to pick a direction because you're not sure which way to go. Especially if there's mortal consequences for it. This is the point of the misdirection. Until you start picking this up and understanding the point is deception, then it's hard to sort things out, and it becomes very confusing. So the point that I'm making is even historians who are trying to study this stuff cannot come to a solid answer on anything. Why? Because there's no solid answer to be found. See, we're dealing with courts who have all these different things called discretion, and the word discretion has a normal English definition that I'm not going to go into, but it's just, you have discretion where you're basically being like hidden on stuff, as in you're not telling everyone's business. Then there's a discretion as in it's your choice to make if you feel like making it. And there's all these different connotations of the plain English word for discretion. But discretion in the legal terms for a judge is basically the equitable remedy power that's granted to him by the kings of old. The kings of old could do whatever they wanted. They were not bound by any laws, any rules. They could change their mind. One day they could execute somebody for one thing. The next day they reward somebody for the exact same thing. There was no consistency. They just did whatever they wanted one day to the next. And there was a point where the noblemen got together and said, okay, we're not dealing with this nonsense anymore because nothing makes sense. Everything's inconsistent and we need a little bit of a consistency here. And that's why they basically petitioned the king and told him, look, we're going to overthrow you unless you start doing some basic stuff to put some guardrails here so we stop dealing with stupid. And that's when the court system started to come out, because before it was like the king's court, right? The king held court. Wherever he was his court. He had an entourage around him all the time. Whatever he said was law. If he said someone would die, they died. If he said someone would be granted immeasurable wealth, they'd be granted immeasurable wealth. It was as simple as trivial and as simple as whatever he felt like doing, he just did it. And the noblemen who started to gain wealth over time were tired of gaining titles and losing titles. And if it's on a Friday, you might lose a title. And by next Thursday, you might gain a title again. The whole thing was like ridiculous. So they were tired of losing all this stuff they were working real hard for. Some of them working hard, some were just inheriting it. But the whole thing, we needed something more of a guardrails. And that's where they came up with this whole legal system. Until you understand that, it's hard to make sense of this whole thing. So it went from just whatever the king felt like doing if he rolled out of bed, then it became this standardized court system that was supposed to have like a consistency to it. And the way they started doing this consistency thing was having judges have judgments go down a particular way, like as in if they if they ruled in one way for a certain group of certain people in front of them, it could be expected they'd rule the same way the next time the same type of people are in front of them. Not the same two people, but the same type of people. This is where it became the jurisprudence in law, where it's basically the philosophy of law. And then, so there's two concepts of jurisprudence, right? So one is the philosophy of law, of how this thing is supposed to work. It's like just generally abstract philosophical concepts. Then the other part of the same concept is the actual case law that's developed over time that gives guardrails that you're supposed to reflect that going forward. And then there's always these different, it gets very convoluted because they say, well, you have to be looking backward to be looking forward to keep consistent, but at the same time, the consistency can't stop you from progression and moving forward with new concepts. So whenever they want to say they're not going to change things out of, they say it's inconvenient to change it because of case law. And on the other hand, they're saying we have to change this because of case law. And all it is that the manifestation of the will of the shadow people is manifest through Team Evil, and that's how things get changed. And they just have all these different legal reasons for doing this and that. It's basically a cover. Like, they know what they want to do, they have an agenda, and they're doing it. And then they use this entire mass of the legal system to disguise what they're actually doing. So they know they're going from A to Z, and they just have to get there in steps. And every step along the way is using deception, misdirection, and downright lying to get them to where they want to be. And they don't care who gets hurt. They don't care who is harmed. They don't care about that stuff because they got an agenda and they're powerful, and it's part of the process of actually hurting the little people. Anyways, so going through this book about trust, it's just amazing how these concepts of fiduciary duty, and they got all these gravitas sounding concepts that sound like, oh, they're noble and they're deep. They're very important, And then they use all these words that are intra vivo. So intra vivo means, so they got these two concepts, right? So they got intra vivo, and the other one is, what was the other one? There's another one that basically means like once you're dead. Oh, testament. So the testament is after you're dead, but the intra vivo is something you can set up while you're alive and living and benefiting from it. So intra vivo just means like you're alive. Vivo means live. And then the testament is basically after you die, there's nothing more you can say. So what you wrote down was the last thing you're saying. So that's why you go to a estate thing where they're basically reading the last will and testament of someone who passed on, and then they basically divvy up the estate to the survivors, and whoever's good to granny might get something, that kind of thing. And just reading this language, if you don't know any better, you just think, oh, this sounds so weighty and it's so important, But it's just, these guys make this stuff up as they go. And what they're doing is they're building on terms that were built on just made up terms from a while ago. And it's like layers and layers and layers of these different games that are just played on top of each other. It's like one scam and then the next scam and the next scam. And what it all comes down to is these guys are using deception to get what they want. And the problem is that when you use deception to get what you want, you're not actually living in the real world. You're not actually being honorable. And this is the part that really upsets me, is that these guys are not actually doing what's right by the people. They're not actually honoring their word. They're not actually doing these things that are, honorable people do. They lie, cheat, and steal to get elected so they can create legislation that then their friends and as lawyers then argue about it goes on and on and on. And it's just a giant mess where they maintain control, and you're not able to reason your way out. You're not able to use their rules against them to reduce their control, because they have the rules set up in such a way that they can just disregard the rules whenever they want. So it's not just double standards, it's like triple and quadruple standards, where they're constantly just moving along in their agenda, and then they use this giant maze that you can't see what they're doing. And if you do see what they're doing, they tell you you're not allowed to do anything about it to stop them. Why? Because you're supposed to be in a civil society. What's a civil society? Oh, it's peaceful. Peaceful, yes, peaceful. You're not allowed to physically do any violence to stop anybody from doing violence. And if you do, then you're going to be charged, and you're going to lose your freedom, your livelihood, might even be killed over the whole thing. But they can do that because they have the monopoly on violence. They can order police to do whatever they want. They can order soldiers to do whatever they want. They can just do whatever they want, and you're not allowed to do anything about it. And they claim it's a democratically run system, and it's not. They just rig the elections to put their guys in charge so that they can just manipulate things the way they want it with a veneer of credibility, so it's not so obvious. So anyways, I'm reading through this book and I'm cringing while I'm doing it. I have to stop periodically because I have a dislike for the legal system. And why do I dislike the legal system? Because it's a giant scam. And by the time you get to the point of having this conclusion for yourself, you might have wasted years and years and years of your life trying to sort out the mess, thinking, oh, the guys before me, they might not have been successful because they didn't figure out this little extra thing. And oh boy, if we just remind the people in charge that they work for us, not for anybody else. And if they just get reminded they work for us, they'll now realize they work for us and things will go well. And it doesn't happen that way. And there's other people who think, oh, well, they weren't playing the rules right in the rules of court. No, they just dropped the ball or something. You know, they're just sloppy about it. So then some guy goes into court thinking he's going to play the rules to the max with professional finesse, and then he loses, and he just can't figure it out. And it'll take him years to figure out how he lost, if he ever figures it out, because they might not even explain it to him. And if someone does get success in some weird way that might surprise the judge or surprise the matter before them, and they're actually able to get a victory, it'll just be overturned on appeal. And the appeals court just reverses whatever the original court did, gives their reasons that are often nonsense, but then to appeal from that appeal becomes ridiculously difficult and then almost impossible, because you have this first layer of court where anyone can just pay to play. And then to appeal from that first layer of court, it doesn't even matter what the matter was. It doesn't matter what the facts were. All that matters is that you have to prove that the judge erred in a way that was so egregious that it'll bring disrepute to the legal system. And we're already dealing with scoundrels here. So what kind of thing is actually going to be enough to reverse a lower court decision because it was so egregious and would bring disrepute to the legal system? These are very few. And then if you go past that to the major appeal, like usually a Supreme Court, so whether it's in a Supreme Court of the United States or Supreme Court of Canada or Supreme Court of whatever country has common law, these courts have this funnel whereby they only accept, I think it's 3 out of every 100 applications. So it doesn't matter if you've got 100,000 valid cases where injustice was done, and it's an open shut case, and all they got to do is just put their name on it and show, yep, this is ridiculous. But instead they don't. No, they actually have this funnel whereby they only take 3 out of 100 cases. And then, so why do they take those 3 out of the 100? Well, the only ones they take are the ones that are politically expedient for their friends to achieve some goal. So these are only the cases that end up being these weird cases that are so obscure where you're like, why did they take this case? And you're trying to, figure out, like, there's some little property dispute in the middle of nowhere between some company and somebody. And you're thinking, like, why would the Supreme Court take up this case of all the cases that actually matter? And then what'll happen is at the end of they'll give this like 20-page decision that'll be written all over the place. It's like going in circles. And in that decision, there'll be a little paragraph that'll be the paragraph that was the point of that case. And that paragraph will redefine property law from that point on in the courts. And that new paragraph will actually make it so that big companies are able to just throw people off land or do whatever they want to do. They basically change the law in a way that benefits the powerful. And the whole point of the case was to get that paragraph in a Supreme Court decision that would then be looked at by every other case coming forward. And once they cinch that deal, then anyone trying to sue will have their lawsuit thrown out pretty quick, because they'll say, look at this paragraph here. See that paragraph? See how important that paragraph is? That paragraph says you have no chance in hell of winning this case, so we're not even going to let it go forward. And they close the gates. It's as simple as that. It's a simple goal where a bunch of people contrive together to have a lawsuit move forward, and then the whole point of the lawsuit is not to win or lose, but to get a paragraph in favor of the powerful that will then decide all case law from that point on, because there's this thing called stare decisis. And stare decisis basically means that you have to follow the higher courts. So if there's a higher court than the court you're in who decided in a way that's against your type of party, then the court you're in should find in that favor as well. And they're not allowed to go against that unless for some special big deal reason. And it just never goes for small people. Small people never get those little extra special treatments that change anything. It's only the big people that do, because the whole thing's a scam. And this is the thing, is that it's so frustrating. You understand the rules of court. You can recite them forward and backwards. And then you can understand the jurisprudence, which is the philosophy of law. And then you can be up to your eyeballs in case law. And you could have like 10 cases that all show that someone in your position and everything lines up in the 4 points that matter, and it all went in your favor. And the judge can still rule against you. And there's nothing you can do about it except appeal. And then when you appeal, you're trying to appeal to these other judges who don't want to rule against their buddy down below, who they golf with all the time. And this is what I'm just reminded of as I'm reading this book, because this book is written by lawyers for lawyers to basically create legal trusts and estates and like wills and testaments and things like that. And it's just so frustrating because I can just see the scam. I can just see it almost in between every word. It's just like scam is not going to really work for regular people. But if someone's powerful enough, they can pay a team of lawyers enough money to make sure things go in their favor. This is the thing that's so difficult to wrap our minds around about the courts, is the courts are all about, if you're powerful and connected, you don't need money to win in court. But if you're powerful and connected and full of money, then it's almost guaranteed you're going to win in court, because you will win by attrition. You'll be able to outspend, outlast, outperform the other guys to the point where they're going to run out of money before you do, and eventually you're going to get a decision in your favor, even if it takes 10 years, over some trivial matter. And this is the part that people don't get, is that the court system is a war of attrition, where each party who's in court is paying to be there. Unless you're self-represented or pro se litigant, and even then it costs money. And what's amazing is there's a giant amount of case law that shows that someone who's a pro se litigant who wins should be getting compensated for their time as if they're a lawyer, but the judges never go in that direction. There's lawyers who did pro se cases, and they had this giant case law thing and all these decisions and all, showing that a lawyer who's representing himself should get paid as if he's a lawyer. And the judges always go against them. Why? Because they don't want to have it set up so that they have to actually pay people who are presenting themselves in their own case without lawyers to be rewarded in any way. They need to make sure that it's only an impoverishment exercise, where if you go into court on your own as a pro se litigant or self-represented, you're just going to lose. You're going to lose your time, lose your energy, lose your wealth. You're going to lose your mind before you're done, or you give up. And this is the part of it that's so dastardly, is that they know this. This is part of the game. This is what they do. This is how they operate. This is the point of it. And until you understand the point of it, it's hard to make sense of a lot of this stuff going on. And anyway, the cool thing about trusts is that if you get into the lawful side of trust and stay away from the legal, is that you can operate within their system, at the edges of their system, without coming into problems. But the way to do it is to not have anything to do with their system in the legal realm, which means not having a bank account in the name of the trust, not having a tax number in the name of the trust, because the tax man will be happy to give you a tax number if you ask him to. And the only way to get a bank account is if you ask him for a tax number, and then you can get a bank account. And then they have the legal right to then audit you and figure out what you're up to, because you signed the deal with the devil, or you signed away. If you ask for a tax number, there's all this little miniature writing that you'll need a double magnifying glass to read, and it says you've given up all right of privacy and they can monitor what you're doing, and blah 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 blah, goes on and on and on. And they basically have control of all your assets from that point on, whether you know it or not. And it's just so irritating. It is just irritating beyond irritating that this thing is going on. So if you stay in the lawful side, you can actually, it just becomes a contract thing where you're creating a contract, which you're establishing a trust. And the trust requires the donor to be giving real property of value. It's either money or gold or assets or vehicles or real property or title to property and things like that. This all goes into the name of the trust, and the trustee is the person who's taking care of this on the interest of the beneficiaries. And if you stay within that framework, those simple guardrails, you can actually run a trust for a long time without ever coming into conflict with anybody, especially when you're doing something just like doing business and things. And if you do come into conflict in some way, you can usually sort it out in the lawful side, because if someone actually has a valid claim, they've been injured or whatever, you can sort that stuff out. It doesn't require a giant lawsuit to deal with it. It's just like, what's the claim? Was there an obligation on your part to perform or not perform? And it goes on and on. So this is what's really important about doing lawful trust, is that it is registered. No documents are given to anyone except the people involved. It's totally in the lawful side. It's between the people, between the adults who are doing their thing. And you can have a full-going business as long as everyone who's part of the business, as in the people who are essentially the clients, are also part of the membership association. So You can basically run a business that is a combination of a trust and a PMA, or private membership association. And when you start combining these two together, you have a very powerful way to do everything you need to do to actually be able to earn value, exchange value, and earn value for everyone involved. But it's just important to recognize, to stay into the lawful side of things. Don't get into legal. As soon as you get into legal, it's a total losing situation. At the point of you getting into legal, it's just loss, attrition, get run down. It goes on and on. So I'm reading this book because it was lent to me by a friend, and I'm reading through it, and I'm just astounded the language in there, because they're basically saying that, if you have an oral trust, you don't even need to write this stuff down. You just have an oral trust, and that oral trust is good enough as long as the intentions are clear and no one can make a contrary explanation of why this thing is set up the way it is. And so even this is what's amazing, is that even among the lawyers, they can have just a verbal trust. They can just orally say it and it's good to go, and then they can argue about it for years afterwards because they don't care. They're not worried about anything being correct or incorrect or ironclad, this and that. They will actually just argue about it until someone gets rich. And then when you go into the lawful side, the point of this book is that it's showing that the language is mercurial. It's changing all the time. It doesn't matter if you have one word for one thing and the same thing being used with another word to describe it. It's just all over the place. And then on top of that, they have oral contracts that are not written down, and they have these contracts that are written down. And then when you start going through the case law and they start giving all these examples of this case and that case and how the judge went this way and the judge went that way, and then the judge used this word instead of that word, and it's just, it's so irritating. I'm reading it because I'm reminded of why I want to stay away from the legal realm. The legal realm is just, there's no benefit there. There's no good going into there. And this is the problem, is that we're dealing with a society that's run by the legal system because the powerful are doing it this way. Why? Because they benefit. Every time you turn around, they're benefiting in some way. They're always skimming off the top and skimming off the bottom and skimming, doing this thing called taxes. And if you don't pay your taxes, you're at threat of going to jail, or threat of this and threat of that. And if you don't know how to play the game, you actually might end up going to jail. And this is what's crazy about it. I mean, the IRS is like a system that is so astounding, where it's supposed to be voluntary in the very language that is being used by the, trying to remember the IRS. It's a volunteer system where you can just say, you can just offer taxes if you want, or not offer taxes. But the problem is they trick you this way and that. No, I'm not going to get into that in this particular podcast. But the point is the whole thing is a big mess. And the only way to keep out of the mess is to stay in the lawful side. We will close with a prayer. God, please move the hearts of the listeners. Move them in the spirit as only you can, to be better, choose more, and be examples of what you intend your children to be. Remind us in ways that only you can that we are the children of God. We have free will. We are co-creators of this beautiful world that you gifted to us, and we will have abundance if we but choose to, and act to manifest it. God, give them a vision of how they can fulfill their destiny as individuals here and now. We ask that you inspire us to be fearless warriors in spirit and the sword, to be shining examples of what we can do with our divine potential. Fear not, fear not, fear not. We ask that we manifest unwavering courage, the conviction and the heart to live a life worth living, and to do our part to manifest a godly realm, full of peace and love and abundance, here and now. We claim our space as holy. In the name of Jesus Christ, we put on the armor of God and we pick up the sword of the Spirit. We will act to expand the kingdom. We will manifest goodness in this world. We say these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I'm going to cut off the podcast there for trust at this point. If people are interested in it and I get feedback on it, I'll maybe add some more layers to this. But it's very simple. You've got two basic types. There's the lawful trusts, which is just a law of contracts that's based on the interaction between free men and women, which means you're not a slave. You have to be a sovereign individual to be able to interact this way. The assumption is all God's children are sovereign. We have the birthright of liberty. By sticking with this lawful side of trusts, you just draw up the contract the way you want, being specific enough to be able to, so anyone reading the contract will know what the trust is all about, what the responsibilities are for the trustee to act in a certain way, who the beneficiaries are, and what they're entitled to. And then if you're running an active trust, you basically have weekly, monthly, or yearly meeting whereby the trustee gets together with someone to record the updates of what's going on, and they dispense with the property, as in they write down if there's a chunk of cash, how much cash was dispersed to the beneficiaries, or if there's property being used, whether the property's still usable by the trust or it's been, written off somehow. If there's a vehicle in the name of the trust and the vehicle is destroyed, it's no longer part of the trust. But maybe the insurance replaced it, or who knows. This is all documented in the weekly or monthly or yearly minutes, it's called, where basically the trustee gets down and writes down what's up. So the idea is that from the moment of the creation of the trust, there needs to be a cataloging through these minutes, which is basically just a guy sitting down with someone else who's the recorder, who's going to note down all the different things that happen to update the file. And what this allows it to happen is that if say the trustee died the next day, someone could come in as a replacement trustee and know what's up. They'd know from the beginning of the trust what were the assets, what was the intention, who were the beneficiaries, and then they'd be able to see very easily the different steps that got them to the point where they took over the reins. They'd be able to actually continue on from there. That's the point of the minutes of these weekly, monthly, or yearly get-togethers. It just documents what's going on for posterity, as in whoever needs to take over, or if someone's wondering what's going on, or the original donor wants to check in and make sure things are going appropriately, it can be accounted for, right? This is just about being honest and transparent about what's going on. And all of this is not in the legal side, it's all lawful. It's just how things are done. And again, you have the donor who donated property, the trustee who's operating that property for the benefit of the beneficiaries. And it's a very simple, straightforward thing. Once you get into it and start getting in the flow of it, it's really, really easy. And once you learn the original creation documents, like the formula you like, you can actually create many trusts all in succession. As in, you could have a trust for each item, as in a trust for a particular car, a trust for a boat, a trust for a property where people are living communally on, things like that. Once you get the basics down, you can apply it to many different things and situations. And you get to write it in plain English. You don't need to use legalese. It's actually better to use plain English language so that everyone knows what you're talking about. And then the other side, so to compare it, that's the lawful side where nothing is registered. There's no taxation. There's none of that entanglement with the legal side. Then you get the legal side, which is its own beast. In the legal side, they claim jurisdiction over you. They claim all kinds of statutes and acts that are dealing with trusts, and they claim you have to perform a certain way according to their rules or you'll be punished. They can actually seize the assets of the trust, roll it up, liquidate it, and pay off whoever they want for damages for something that doesn't even exist. And this is sort of the danger of dealing with legal trusts. Whenever you go to a lawyer, they will only create a legal trust for you because they're lawyers. They're part of the legal system. They've signed oaths to the bar, BAR, the British Accredited Registry. They're not agents for you. They're foreign agents for the Crown. Whether you're in the United States or you're in Canada or you're in England or whatever else where there's Commonwealth that common law is. And until you wrap your mind around this, you're going to keep getting misled, keep getting misdirected, and keep losing your stuff, having your life wasted. And that's why, you can go down that road if you want the safety and security of feeling good about playing with the legal system, and paying their lawyers and paying their lawyers and paying their lawyers. Because that's what it's about. It's a giant money scheme where you pay lawyers to argue about stuff. And there's no end to the arguments that they can have about stuff. Once you go down that path, it's just astounding. They'll argue about arguing and argue some more. And all the while, they'll charge you by the hourly bill, which is $300 an hour for a lowbrow lawyer to $1,000 to $2,000 an hour for a highbrow lawyer who has a whole team of people who will work on your behalf. Those lawyers that charge $1,000 an hour have connections. They play golf with the politicians. They play golf with the judges. These guys get you special access and special decisions in your favor. Even if everything looks like it shouldn't go in your favor, they'll make sure it goes in your favor because there's handshake deals and money being exchanged in the background. And this is how it actually works. And until you realize that, you don't realize it, as in you don't know what's going on, you'll end up falsely believing that there's honorable people doing honorable things in the legal system, because they're not. The reason why a judge has the title of honorable is because it's the only way he can be called honorable. Because if he's actually judged by the merit of his person, you'd find he's very dishonorable. And this is the case most of the time. I'm reading in these law books how ridiculous it is. They just can't even realize. These lawyers will write stuff and they don't realize how ridiculous it is that they're writing the way they are. They basically say, regarding judges, that just because there's judges who are dishonorable scoundrels, who are biased and rule in ways that make no sense to anyone but themselves, that doesn't mean that all judges are like that. And the presumption is all judges are honorable, upstanding, have no interest in the case other than seeing justice being done based on the rules of procedure in front of them. And the amazing thing is, it doesn't matter if 99 out of 100 judges are corrupt to the bone. The assumption is they're all perfect and all not corrupt. See what I mean? The assumptions built into the system allow the system to be super duper corrupt, and you're not allowed to say anything about it. And if you do, there's nothing you can do about it, because they have these assumptions built in that protect them. It's just amazing. That's why I'm saying stay out of the legal trust and stay into the lawful trust if you want to have a good time and deal with people who are on the up and up. Most honorable men, if something happens between them as a disagreement, they will settle things honorably. They'll figure out a fair, agreement to settle some difference, and they'll move on. It's the dishonorable people, or the greedy people, or the people who have no idea what's going on, who cause all the trouble, because they're living in a fantasy. So, how do you deal with someone who's living in a fantasy that's not tethered to reality? This is the problem we're dealing with. And this is the problem with legal. Most people have no idea what legal is. They've not read a legal book. They have no comprehension about the realities of what's going on. And they just believe the movies, they believe the TV, they believe nonsense. And they're a danger to us. So, I'm going to wrap it up there, otherwise I'll keep adding stuff to this trust concept. And hopefully you found this interesting. A lot of forward and backwards in history and trying to untangle things to try to help you distinguish between the two. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Climbing up a hill right now, trying to catch my breath. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you like it, please like, subscribe, share it with your network, because I'm being shadow banned everywhere. The Team Evil is doing everything they can to hide me in plain sight. People looking for me on the internet can't find me. If they think they found me, it's actually someone else with a very similar name. That's not me. This is what ends up happening: is they make clone accounts and they just draw traffic away, and they do all kinds of skullduggery that is just super irritating, but not surprising for these collectivists, right? When you're dealing with collectivists and communists, they are evil beyond evil, but they believe they're righteous, which is the irony of the whole thing. They think they're fighting the good fight when in fact they're destroying the very society that raised them and hating the society that gave them the freedom to destroy that same society. It's just astounding. So anyways, I'll wrap it up there, otherwise I'll keep going. Thanks for listening. That's all for now. God bless.